largest bottleneck, to my mind, believe it or not, is not the money, because the largest bottleneck is really just having the clinical team and people that have a command of this technology and an ability to discern how to properly use this technology. And historically, since there have been so few sites in North America that have even had access to this technology, there's just a dearth of clinicians that are formally trained and physicists that are formally trained in these technologies. So to me, that's the number one bottleneck, that's the number one clinical challenge, to be able to have the right team to implement it. Because the funding, you know, we're lucky, we're working with a great group at AMD Equities, and we have funding in place for our multiple installs around the nation. But even if you have the funding for these type of projects, it's hard to find the clinical resources. As far as other challenges, I mean, there are always financial challenges, but these technologies are all CMS reimbursed, and it's not the same as some other innovative technologies that are very exciting, but haven't yet reached the level of being able to achieve actual CMS codes. So while that is a challenge, a lot of those variables are taken off the table for us because there's already that pathway that's been carved out, that because these technologies are respected nationally and recognized by the government. And of course, as you know, once CMS sets certain guidelines and defines payer scale, then all of the other private insurance companies fall into line after them. I hope that answers your question.
Very good. Well, we have a few more minutes, I think, for general questions. So we'll keep the questions rolling. And there's a gentleman, I think, back here. This, for the open panel, if anybody has any questions for the rest of the panel, we have a few more minutes.
Well, I just was going to comment on the CMS reimbursement. Because what I thought was interesting is that proton therapy was CMS reimbursed without clinical trials. And was wondering if you might comment on that.
Sure. This is a great topic. So I hesitate to even get started on this topic, but it's an excellent question. And we discuss this all the time at our national meetings for physicians and radiation oncologists. Different people will differ on this. So I'll share what my point of view is that let's just talk about radiation oncology. Every time over the last 100 years in radiation oncology, when we've come up with an advancement, it's been based on technological advancements. Our field is probably the most technology-dependent field other than any other field in medicine. Perhaps radiologists, we work very closely with them. So every time there's an advancement in technology, which, as everyone in this room knows, happens on a weekly basis, right? I mean, the minute we're buying a product, a cell phone, a TV, or what have you, it's obsolete in the next week or two because there's technology's changing so fast. So whenever, as these technologies are changing, radiation oncology groups are adapting their technologies to utilize and benefit from the general wave of technology as it's moving forward with computer chips, et cetera, what have you. What we're doing is we're building on whatever the basic reference is. So if we're treating a certain way now and technology's improved, and now we have more precise ways to deliver a radiation beam, then from our perspective, I shouldn't say our, but from my perspective and the perspective of many physicians, it's unethical, in our opinion, to subject patients to a clinical trial to say that here's the way things were in the 1970s. Now, due to advanced technologies, better computer chips, cutting-edge hardware, cutting-edge software, robotics, the CyberKnife stereotactic robotic radiosurgery technology, we're able to deliver this radiation so much more precisely. But let's have a clinical trial and enroll 10,000 people in this trial or a few thousand people in this trial and demonstrate that. Now, I think there's absolutely a role for clinical trials, for instance, with gene therapy and a lot of other areas in medicine where there's an unknown element. my feeling is that as these new technologies are coming on board, they're building blocks, and we already have that foundation established, so we're continuing to refine it. And I think it's the same thing with protons. We've been treating with protons for decades now. It's not something that just came out of the bag a year or 2 or 3 ago, and we don't know what the results are. We know from a physics perspective that a proton beam enters the body, it stops, and it does not continue to penetrate. So it's an oversimplification, but you have to think, if you're saving normal tissues from receiving radiation, that's got to be a good thing. And I would be hesitant to enroll people in a clinical trial to demonstrate that. But I think that as we have proton technology that's being implemented around the country and around the world, it's incumbent upon us to put those patients in clinical trials so we can continue to observe them in the long run and track data and accrue data. But to randomize them to old technology versus new technology, for me personally, that's a struggle. I certainly don't speak on behalf of the physician community on that, though.
All right. Thank you. Here comes Jane. We're going to have to wrap it up. You can catch them in the hallways and so forth if there's additional questions, but we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.